Concord was a financial success, just not for PlayStation. Who was it a financial success for then? Me? No. Asmongold? Definitely.
Okay, everyone, here's the deal today. There's a lot of Concord news swirling about the place. There's talk of toxic positivity at the studio. The game director has actually self-demoted. And then there's the story I'm doing in full depth today. $400 million. It's a massive claim. So the question is, did Concord cost that? But it actually goes deeper, because we've got to ask who Sony acquired Firewalk from. We've got to work out the financial incentives involved, and let's just say the answer is deeper than you think. And by the end of today's video, I guarantee you will understand way more of how the business of games actually works.
Probably I'll understand way more about the business of how games work, more than actual Sony and Concord.
Here's the spark of today's story. Colin Moriarty tweeted this, which I've edited down for brevity. I spoke with someone from Concord, and it's worse than you think. It was called The Future of PlayStation with Star Wars-like potential and a toxic positivity culture, halted negative feedback.
The future of PlayStation. Oh my god. How do you fuck up this badly?
It cost $400 million. This
400 million. I thought it was like 200 million. And I thought they were stretching a little bit. 400 million. There's more than that. It wasn't a solid 400 million. They say 400 million because it was actually more than 400 million.
Was an explosive tweet. It absolutely went all over the internet, and it makes sense. It does kind of back up our assumptions. $400 million? I mean, of course, it's Sony. They're mad. Spider-Man 2 cost $315 million, even though it was a sequel with shared technology to its predecessor. Toxic positivity? I mean, yeah, how does something that obviously looked so doomed even get made? Star Wars potential? That also makes sense. The thing looks like Star Wars with some Guardians of the Galaxy thrown into a blender. And as for the future of play,
it looks like you got Play-Doh and then built Guardians of the Galaxy Star Wars characters out of it.
PlayStation, well, of course, under Jim Ryan, PlayStation's live service push so far is a mess. Of course, Jim's God now, and yeah, Helldivers 2 was absolutely a win, but that started in 2016. The rest are chaos. Naughty Dog killed The Last of Us Part 2
Helldivers 2 was and is a disaster.
Multiplayer. Horizon has had multiplayer projects, yes, plural, that are just...
And Horizon is going to be a disaster too. First one was a semi-success, and then they were like, you know what? It needs a Lego game, it needs a VR game, it needs a mobile game. They're doing the thing that destroys game franchise to one of the coolest game franchises. Just make good games, damn it. Stop trying to make money.
MIA. There's the likes of the Deviation Games deal that went south. Sony actually went from saying 12 live service releases by 2026 fiscal year to only 6. So it has.
That's still too many.
Organic growth from Guerrilla and Naughty Dog is clearly a wash here. But what about inorganic growth, like say the Bungie acquisition? Well, you've seen the headlines as well. That's not going amazingly. So yeah.
Yeah, didn't they just like pretty much completely disband Bungie and take it over?
Yes. I can totally see the story of SIE saying to themselves, this game will be our future, part of our live service plan, and somehow $400 million being involved. But again, that 400 million number has been contested. So the question is Colin lying? I don't think he is at all. I think he is telling what he believes to be true. Is his source lying? Well, that's possible, but I'm going to assume the best here. Now, the podcast Colin did, where all this comes from, does mention a $200 million number from Sony, and that's corroborated by other people, but then other people then also refute the $400 million from the tweet. To work this out, I had to go to the beginning. I had to research Harold Ryan, because it all starts with him. And doing that sort of thing is completely normal and grand, given this topic that we're doing. But not always, and that's where today's sponsor comes in, who I'm glad to have keeping me protected online, especially as threats get more significant and numerous. I mean, I've got good passwords and all of that, but the alarming amount of data leaks just means that more of your personal info, like your phone number, your home address, your email, is out there. That gets harvested. by data brokers without our consent, and then they sell it to whoever decides to buy it. So at best, we get spam. At worst, we get security breaches, and that's why I use incogni.com/Bellular News. They keep me safe, and they'll keep you safe online with 60% off if you use my code.
Oh.
Now, here's what...
Oh, is it a digital scrubber? It scrubs you from online. Guess what? They're a scam. They don't fucking work. Stop selling this garbage.
Dashboard. So 96 takedowns sent, 12 in progress, 84 completed, and they've put me on 12 suppression lists, which means that those brokers won't recollect my information. And most recently, they took me down from Definitive Healthcare, Ekata, and Ad Element, none of which I've heard of, so I don't want to be on their lists. And you can benefit from their services today with 60% off an annual plan at incogni.com/Bellular News. Concord was developed by a studio called Firewalk, and the popular story is that Firewalk made a game so good, Sony just gobbled them up. That is only, friends, partially true. There is another party involved, and that is Probably Monsters. Harold Ryan founded Probably Monsters in 2016, and by then he had quite a career. Harold actually rose from being a game tester at Microsoft all the way to Bungie, where he was test manager on Halo 2. By 2006, the launch year of Halo 3, he was studio manager, and by 2008, he was the CEO. He actually ran Bungie. He spent the next 8 years as CEO of Bungie. He then left to found Probably Monsters in January
2008. What came out around 2008 from Bungie? Was that the Halo Reach disaster? I love Halo Reach. It's my favorite Halo, but it was a disaster. And I don't think it was a good Halo, to be honest. It was a great game, bad Halo.
16. And as for Bungie's new CEO, well, of course, Pete Parsons, a man with an admittedly pretty damn good taste in classic cars, but a pretty rough tenure as CEO of the company. You can head up this video for the latest on that. Back to Harold. During his tenure, Bungie launched Halo Reach. They left Microsoft, they launched Destiny. They completed the shift from Halo-style games all the way to the modern live service. In a way, they pioneered it. Now, Destiny absolutely had its problems, but what it was a massive brand that sparked trends, and he led the company through that transformational period, one that the rest of the industry would spend billions trying to chase. Probably Monsters, then, was founded by him and others, and it started in stealth mode in 2016, slowly building up a team of Bungie veterans. The first funding is unknown, but they did get an $18 million seed funding round in 2019, and then they announced a $200 million Series A in 2021, aiming for 300 people within a year. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The Series A was announced in 2021, but Firewalk, the studio that actually made Concord, they started in 2018 as a part of Probably Monsters, though the idea for Concord was a few years younger. Now, by that time, they did seem to have other studios, at least one was sizable. Firewalk then went on to announce a Sony partnership in 2021. The team then grew to the upper double digits, according to one of the co-founders, and Sony got for them a new building to kind of reinforce a bit of separation of them as a team. By now, then, things look awesome for Probably Monsters. I mean, come on, they've got a big deal with Sony, they've got multiple studios, they have $200 million in VC funding. All surely looks absolutely amazing, but remember what the early 2020s were like? Remember the COVID bubble? Here's a bit of a laugh to illustrate that. The company Zoom went from trading at $70 in 2019 to $559 a share in 2020, down to $384 in 2021, and now is at $67. Collective madness that lost a lot of people a lot of money, of course, to the gain of the few who played it right.
Yeah, the gaming industry skyrocketed because so many people were playing games. I know people that were buying games that had never bought games before. Never even played games. They were old people just buying video games because they've been playing games on their phone. They were like, you know what? I'm going to try an actual full game. And then COVID goes away. Everybody starts going back to work. Old people and people like me who hate the video games industry stop playing video games.
For Probably Monsters, when they get $200 million, that's obviously based on a future valuation, probably a large one that is a decent multiple of that $200 million. And that means more than just one studio. So you've got Firewalk, Concord, Sony. There's another team called Cauldron with God of War and Destiny developers who are working on a narrative game. And then there's a team who would later be announced as Battle Barge who are working on a co-op RPG with talent from Torchlight and Borderlands. All must have seemed amazing, but then the next few years happened. The internal state of things may have
I see the Borderlands. I see the Borderlands 3 specifically.
contrasted all of that public amazing news. So April 2023 saw Sony announce the Firewalk acquisition. Probably Monsters had 450 employees at the time across Battle Barge and Cauldron, plus any other teams that they hadn't announced. By June, though, things would change. They announced that Cauldron's game was cancelled, and when he announced it, Harold said the competitive landscape was too uncertain. And I suppose for some sort of narrative game, you can understand that. Just a few months later, August 22nd, we had the absolute legendary game of the decade, Immortals of Avian, starring Jack Avian, who tried to stop the Everwar. Unfortunately, though, it bombed on a reported budget of $125 million. You can see why the market perhaps isn't enthusiastic. But don't worry,
Yeah, I don't
because
even know
around
what
the
this
same
game
time,
is.
Battle Barge was revealed to the public. Externally, then, it looked a bit worrying. I mean, they only had one announced studio. They just had to kill one of their major games. It was only Battle Barge. Well, turns out that's actually not the case. They had incubation teams, and that's why in April 2024, they unveiled Hidden Grove, another studio. They highlighted it once more, having Destiny 2 veterans like their general manager, who was a creative director over at Bungie. Now, I dug up this Polygon interview from April, and in that,
It sounds to me what Sony did was they took some really, really good studios that had some good games under their belt, split them up and put them into different teams.
the GM basically hinted to the journalist that there would be Battle Royale elements, and then said there'd be a closed alpha in the summer. Now, either closed alpha means closed alpha, and
Battle Royale, huh? Yeah, they were way behind. This ain't 2019 anymore, bruh.
it has not been leaked. And, like, it is actually happening, and it's going to plan. Either that, or, well, we haven't heard anything about it, and the summer is past, and therefore, maybe there's been some sort of delay.
If Concord was a extraction shooter,
I mean,
if Concord was an extraction shooter, they probably would have been good. Probably would have sold. Because we ain't got very many good extraction shooters. They're we got some good ones, but they're not there yet. You know what I mean? We're still trying to figure out that genre.
thinking first principles, I hear BR elements, and I certainly think that that's not on trend anymore. And then I think about the other game being done by Battle Barge. It's a co-op RPG, but it's one with Torchlight and Borderlands developers, and that makes me think that in both cases they're working on late entries to saturated markets, something that Sony of course glossed over when they went for Concord. So, now that you know the context, let's talk about the deal and the 400 million. Once again, I'm trying to steelman everybody here, assuming no lies. Colin and those who refute him, I believe, are telling their own personal truth based on all that they believe. That means the $400 million number comes from somewhere, but it's not what Sony sunk into Concord's development, given how many people are saying that's not the case. Now, Colin's podcast mentions PlayStation spending 200 million. The tweet says it cost 400 million. The it there is Concord. And the most simple explanation there is you just add the 200 million from the Series A to the 200 million from PlayStation, and then you get the cost of Concord spread between Sony and probably Monsters being 400 million. But that, of course, is not an accurate thing, because the $200 million Series A funding is at least for 2 internal studios, not just the Concord development, and of course any incubators that we don't know about. In fact, as it pertains to Concord, the bulk of its development would have been paid by Sony via their exclusive publishing contract. So to me, the reported $200 million from PlayStation is basically just the cost of publishing Concord. That does mean paying for the new building for that team. It means paying for that team's expansion and also paying for outsourcing. There was quite a lot of outsourcing involved in Concord, although that is an extremely common thing within the games industry, far more than most people know, and it's extremely prevalent with, say, Insomniac and their games. So that inflating things up to 400 million just doesn't really pass the sniff test. Either then the $400 million number comes from adding the Series A, or Sony ended up paying 200 million to acquire the studio. But even if it is the latter, why would they acquire the studio when Helldivers 2 shows that all you need is an exclusive publishing deal? And that is where today's story actually gets interesting. On the surface, yes, Sony loved Concord and they wanted it, but I don't think that's the full story because of 2 points. Point number 1 is Bungie. I mean, obviously Sony bought Bungie for $3.7 billion. Firewalk are mostly ex-Bungie, and no doubt there would be strong synergy given the crossover in the sorts of
I'm gonna take a guess and I'm gonna say Helldivers 2 didn't tick their monetization boxes, and Concord did. They weren't looking at Concord, they were looking at the piece of paper that was like, it has all these things. Oh my god, we're gonna make so much money because we put all the things. Look at all the checkboxes checked.
Games they're making. Point 2 then is Deviation Games. Essentially, a team of ex-Treyarch people founded a studio, they're working on an FPS. Sony clearly wanted a Call of Duty competitor. That made a lot of sense given, what Microsoft wanted to do with Activision Blizzard King, but that game ended up going south and it appears that Deviation is now dead.
Why would you make a Call of Duty competitor when Call of Duty players don't even want to play Call of Duty?
The thing there for Sony is they were merely the publisher. That meant they did not own the studio. They did not have full control. The best they could do at a certain point is just to walk away. And so burned by an experience like that, I think acquisition must have looked good. That explains it from Sony's side, but you're probably thinking, hang on a second, Probably Monsters just got Sony to pay for the whole development of a game. Why on earth would they sell the studio? There's a very good reason, so let's work out the other side of the deal. The most important thing to understand is that Probably Monsters is a venture capital-backed studio collective. That means that selling a studio does fit their business model, and the broad idea is going to be something like this. Build a team, have it make a game, either run that game internally off your own steam, or take a deal, be that acquisition, or be that a publishing deal. But that's only a surface level read. We've got to go deeper to see how the business model actually makes sense. And that's because video games, in a way, are like films. In many ways, they're not. But both start with pre-production. Writing, prototyping, solving tech issues, and building pipelines, ideally with veteran staff. As an example, like the sorts of staff that Probably Monster was able to target. And when pre-production goes amazingly, you get The Lord of the Rings. When pre-production does not go amazingly, you get the Hobbit trilogy. So the way it works is you do your pre-production,
That's pretty good analogy.
Solid case for your game, but then you actually need, say, 5 times more people, 6, 7, 8 times more people to actually build the thing, and that might not even be including the people that you'd be contracting to as well. If you're going to do that, you need a lot of money, so why spend your own? You should, doing good business, spend somebody else's money, and that's why you got a publisher. For Concord, that publisher was Sony, and again, remember, Sony had a full publishing deal for this game before they decided to acquire the studio. In a case like this,
has this guy mentioned at all about any of the DEI stuff or the woke stuff? Let me know in the comments if you've seen any of this guy's videos. Because every video that I've seen him talk about games like this, he never brings it up. And yeah, that's not the main issue. Yeah, there are more issues, but man, the DEI stuff is an issue in every single game. Even Space Marine, they had to throw people out of their not throw people out. They had to basically tell people to fuck off with the DEI stuff. Look at what's happening with the CEO of Games Workshop or whatever it's called. The people who made Space Marine and Warhammer.
Sony pays for full production, which is the most expensive part. And that kind of makes sense. Sony are a big company, they have a lot of money, what they can provide is capital and scale. A smaller, more incubation-focused company, well, maybe they are the sort of company that's good at making ideas, building small teams of absolute pros. And that's sort of how the market shakes out. Now let's take Helldivers 2 as an example. Obviously Arrowhead had a good relationship with Sony because of Helldivers 1, but Arrowhead, as of January 2016, had around 30 staff. Of course though, with Sony's deal to do full production for Helldivers 2, the team grew to well over 100, and I believe it's currently growing now. And that means when we look at, say,
that's not good,
and the death of that, it's probably because they could not find a
I don't like it when game studios start to grow because they get too big and they can't handle themselves and they hire more people, get bigger, and then they either make shitty live service games or they have to split up because they're failing.
The publisher for that game. That means that while they might have a great vertical slice, a great plan for the game, they just weren't getting any biters. That means that for Battle Barge and Hidden Grove, those are almost certainly not full-scale production teams. They are going to be pre-production teams, not a small incubation team game jamming. No, they will be larger than that, and they will be more expensive because they're full of veterans, but not full size, not full expense. And indeed, if you go to the Probably Monsters website right now, you do see it lists incubation teams as a thing that they've got, but it's grayed out. There's no public info on them. And what we learn from all of this then is extremely clear. This is business as usual, and it happens in a way that actually misleads and confuses people. As an example, Loads purchased Starfield because they thought that this was Bethesda cooking for 8 years, right? An 8-year Bethesda development, which is more than the usual 4 or 5. But of course, in reality, Starfield existed in pre-production and tests for years, but it only had its full production staff of 275 between
That's too many people.
2023.
That is too many
Meaning
people.
A lot of customers thought they're getting 8 years of extremely expensive AAA development, when in fact, no, it was 3. Though to be clear, 8 years of just shy of 300 people would be a stupid amount to spend on one single game, and it would make the game
By the way-
probably worse.
everybody.
Because more people is absolutely
Maddie
not
here.
merrier, and the one time where
Damn, forgot what I was going to say. Let me go back a little bit.
of just shy of 300 people would be a stupid amount to spend on one single game, and it would make the game probably worse, because more people is absolutely not merrier, and the one time where too many cooks spoils the broth, well, I think that is absolutely pre-production, where you need a small team, so the ideas are good, and the talent density is high. And so what we learn here is the core business model is to make a core game with a vision and a production plan. They then sold one of those to Sony, who decided to double down and purchase the studio, and that's what happened with Firewalk. Probably Monsters don't have to pay for the full production, just incubation. The expensive part is handled by a third party, and ideally, they sell the studio, because when they sell the studio, that's going to be pretty damn great for the people who cut the deal, because you don't dump $200 million into a Series A without some sort of expectation of returns. And so Firewalk is now a studio in limbo. The staff there do not know what Sony have got planned for either Concord or them, but it is relevant that they've got skills that have a lot of overlap with Bungie, and I've heard on the grapevine that Marathon is actually a bit of a shit show, so it seems Bungie might need the help. Now, to understand
Oh, no.
Bungie's dire situation, you gotta watch this
Oh
video first.
no. Oh no. Games industry, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing, dude? You're letting indie games take over, is what you're doing. And older games. Because that's all I've been playing is just old games and indie games. I'm about to start getting back into Terraria again because I've been seeing some people that I like playing it. Maybe the Core Keeper.